It's the Metro on WDET, broadcasting from the Cass Corridor. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, voting has been underway. So we're getting a sense of what the mood has been like at the polls and how many voters have been making their voices heard.
Also, WDET's Voter Guide is your last-minute source for election info. You can find it at WDET.org. We'll examine what's in the guide to help you make informed decisions.
Plus, after the polls close on Tuesday, you might be looking for a way to decompress.
Ooh. Yeah, Tia, that's real. So we'll get some info on a dance party happening on election night. But first, voter turnout in the city of Detroit has been historically kind of low. In the last presidential election, the number of residents casting ballots hovered around 50%.
That's been a lot of focus on changing that this election. It seems like every other day I have a new invite for a Turnout the Vote event with rappers, DJs, and pizza parties.
Same, Tia, same. Some efforts to draw voters to the drop boxes, the early voting centers, and the polls have been in the works for a long time.
The organization 482Forward has been all over the city trying to educate people about what's at stake.
They've been on the streets, canvassing, holding voter forums and voting parties, sending out lots of those text messages and more. And in this work, they're emphasizing the importance of local races.
But has this boosted early voter turnout? We'll try to get some answers.
We will indeed. First, though, Imani Foster of 482Forward joins us to discuss the non-stop work of engaging voters. Imani, thanks for joining the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So first, Imani, tell us who 482Forward pinpointed as its target demographic. Who have you been really trying the hardest to reach right now?
So a lot of the work that we've been doing this election is trying to get the people who are already a part of our base to reach into their own communities. And so we've been working with people who really just don't feel like elections work for them. They don't feel like when they vote, it matters. And we've been asking our members to have those really hard conversations and try to get them to the polls early. So we have a voter squad captain kind of campaign that we have going on where we have each of our members getting 10 of their friends to go to the polls and vote early with them. It could have been at one of our early voting events, or it could have just been at any center that's, local to them, just to go vote early. And once they do, they become a part of our voter squad. And so that kind of helped us to reach those people who feel like, I just need that one tap, that one push to really get me to the polls, because I don't see how it impacts me or you when I vote.
Okay, so you've got the voter squad. What are some other campaigns that you've been running, and which of them do you feel has been really effective thus far?
For sure. So we have a Tip the Scales campaign. I actually have on some of our merch right here. So we have a Tip the Scales campaign. We had a big event that was kind of leading up to it the whole year. It was October 5th. We had a school board candidate forum and a play that was written about our members, about what the world could look like if we elected people that made the decisions that we wanted them to make. And they prioritized people over money and, corporations and things like that. In the Tip the Scales campaign, it was so much fun. We actually had a song that was written by a local rapper. His name is Polo 2 Times. People love the song. They love the dance. They love kind of the framework of Tip the Scales, where the people have the power and not billionaires that kind of have been running this city for a long time. And so we got great turnout. We had about 500 people there. Wow. We were at the theater in Southwest. I'm losing the name of it right now. The Senate Theater. Thank you.
And it was
Tia
just
beautiful. We had 15 school board candidates come out and just let us know who they were, how people could vote for them. We had state reps who will also be on people's ballots that people normally don't see come out. We had senators come out, and we even had a city council person. So it was super dope to just get the political people into the community so that people can see. When you elect people, they're supposed to be accessible to you. They're supposed to work for you.
That's right. That's right. And so folks got to see okay, this is how we should be able to hold them accountable with this kind of face-to-face interaction, asking, why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you support this policy and oppose this one? What are you hearing, Imani, from young people in the city, which I know 482Forward works with a lot of young people and parents? What are you hearing as far as the issues that they're saying they care about most right now?
Sure. So 482Forward actually has a youth organizing collective. It's made up of students who are like 13 all the way to like 19 years old, really high school students, some late middle school. This year, the campaign that they focused on was school facilities. They said that the school facilities are abysmal, whether it comes to rodents or ceiling tiles falling out or not being able to use your gym because there's humps in the floor.
Sure.
Students are really focused on school facilities because it feels like, why should I be in this building, right? Why do I deserve an education where I can't even focus on my teacher because there's a leak happening right behind me?
That's right.
Another thing that we've heard a lot about is school food, and we're super excited to actually be working with some local restaurants on what we hope we can replicate as like a school food council, where restaurants can help, bring in some meals for the students so we can expand their palates. Also, students who might not be from here can see their own, cuisines recognized in the school lunches. And so school food and school facilities are two really big things that we've heard a lot about. Also, school funding is just a huge one, right? Students are like, we don't have enough money for the programs that we want to see, the curriculums we want to see. Our schools don't have arts, extracurriculars, all those things. I think the $94 million that the district got is great.
For the literacy lawsuit, yes.
Exactly.
And that was, that stems from when the state was in control of the Detroit public schools, and the conditions became degraded enough to the point where students said this impacted our ability to learn.
Exactly.
And the district was awarded $94 million to improve literacy efforts within the district.
Yeah.
So
and
go
they
on,
have
I'm sorry.
One great idea that I love that they are doing is paying students, kind of incentivizing them to be a part of something that can help them learn how to read better and improve their literacy for those high school students that were negatively impacted by COVID. So we see when we give schools funding, they do the right thing. We just got to give them what they need.
Yeah, and when you talk about facilities, I mean, we know that Detroit schools, that is how they spent their COVID relief money on facilities because they are in a state of disarray. They're crumbling. They're not the places that kids are getting excited about. And that speaks to chronic absenteeism, right?
Southeastern was closed for like 3 months while they were redoing what happened from the flood. And when you talk to students at Southeastern, it's like, I just didn't go to school when it was online school. I wasn't learning. I don't know. And so we have these students who are behind. And so then what is it that we can do to pull in students who feel like I'm too far behind to catch up? Because I think that can be the sentiment sometimes.
So with the young people you're working with, you're drawing the connection for them and saying, hey, elections matter on these issues. And so that means you've had a big focus on the school board election.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
The school board election is a huge one. There's 22 people running for 3 seats.
Right.
And so we really have gotten people, I think, just excited about that. We had these big posters that said, did you know there's 22 people running for school board? And a lot of people were like, no. And so we did a school board candidate questionnaire. We sent it to every single school board member, and we heard back from, I believe, 15 out of the 22. It's actually on our website, and it was just really a lot of questions that our members came up with. We asked our members, what were your priorities? Questions were about chronic absenteeism, about how you can engage parents and students in what the board is doing, about how you would spend certain money, about how they would work to really help Black students, because we see that our Black students are really struggling, and a lot of other things, transportation, all these kinds of things. The candidate forum also was another opportunity for people to have one-on-one conversations. So we had a speed dating opportunity. All the candidates were outside at a post, and people could just go have 5-minute conversations with candidates. I think it's great because you're used to a forum where they just answer the questions that people come up with. Yeah. But it was really an opportunity for people to say, this is what I care about. So let me just ask you, how would you answer this question right now, spur of the moment? So it was great.
So cool.
Yeah.
The speed dating, it's like, yes, you get to grill that candidate for 5 minutes. It's like an intense first date.
Yes. But then it's like, I have a relationship with this person that I'm voting for, and not just like they're a name on a ballot that I'm just checking off. So it gets people excited to just go and vote. Some people don't feel excited around the elections, but when we can show people this will have a very real impact on your life, just like Proposal S, which is on the back of everybody's ballot. We've been doing a lot of work to make sure people know to vote yes on this proposal, which will help to fund the schools by renewing a tax on businesses, which means the tax already exists, but we just need to make sure that it stays into place. We've been making sure people know that even if you're not excited around everything on the ballot, this is something that will impact students. And even if you don't have kids, the way that your schools and your neighborhood look impact what your neighborhood looks like. We know when a school shutters, the neighborhood begins to shudder. And so we've been just trying to let people know that when you're voting, education is always on the ballot, from the presidential election all the way down to the proposals on the back.
I was just going to ask you, Imani, to give your last minute pitch to people who are on the fence about voting or someone who just hasn't considered it a priority. I think you just answered my question.
Most definitely. I always tell people, education is always on the ballot. And there are so many other things, so many of our other rights that are on the ballot. You just have to realize, what do these people actually do? What is their position responsible for? How can it impact my life tomorrow? When we talk about judges, sheriffs, school board candidates, proposals, all these things are so important. Even presidential elections can impact your tomorrow. So I would say do your research and make sure you get out and vote.
And that means we got to plug the WDET voter guide, where you can learn more about Proposal S and the school board election and many of the other things that we have been discussing. Imani Foster of 482Forward, thank you for joining the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now I turn to you, my partner in all things good, Tia Graham, to help us get a sense of what voter turnout is really looking like so far. We just got some idea of the work on the streets that's been happening. So how is it translating?
We have, Robin. Yes, I have Malachi Barrett here from Bridge Detroit to talk about what's been happening on the ground. Welcome back, Malachi.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. So we have heard on the ground, what have you heard on the ground as people are participating in early voting? What are some of the things you've been seeing? I've been following you on social media, on Twitter, just following along with what's happening, and you've been showing so much. So what have you seen?
I mean, people are voting. It's kind of wild. The embrace of this in-person early voting system that we have set up here has been really wild to see. People were really leaning on absentee ballots in the last two cycles in 2020 and in the 2022 midterms. And there were early voting sites that were made available in those gubernatorial elections in 2022. But this has been different. I mean, we've had 2 weeks basically where the Democrats and Harris campaign has been able to kind of create a 2-week-long turnout operation in Detroit. They've almost got 120 something thousand votes from people. Nearly 7,000 people voted on Sunday alone. It's just kind of amazing to see like how that ground game has really turned into like a lot of energy at the polling sites. I visited a couple of Department of Elections, had just like a steady stream of people coming in and out. People excited. I think people are, they like the flexibility of that option. Certainly we're a Democratic stronghold in Detroit. Let's not get it twisted. The story is kind of how much do voters here support Kamala Harris instead of whether, a majority of the city will. But yeah, I mean, I think it really is going to change elections in a way that we don't really understand yet. And I'm curious to see what happens with the, in-person vote on Tuesday. There was some kind of questioning about whether early voting would kind of cannibalize the people that go to the polls on Tuesday. But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, the clerk thinks we'll have some record turnout, for the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
That's what literally leading into my question. We won't know if early voting has actually resulted in higher voter turnout. And so they're all counted. But, you've spoken to election officials, like you said, you've spoken to some clerks as well. And they've already told you that they feel like this may lead to higher voter turnout. And are we seeing that being represented? Of course, you're seeing more people showing up. But does this truly feel like more people, like you said, on the ground than in 2020 or even the previous year after that or the previous election?
Some of this is reading some tea leaves and some dark magic that probably goes into forecasting election results. It's interesting because you kind of wonder, like, are the people that are showing up to vote, ahead of November 5th, were they just going to vote already?
Exactly.
And this just gives them like a chance to do it sooner. Maybe not. I think what it does do is allows those people who are really engaged, it gives them more time to drag their friends and family members who are maybe less engaged or don't vote out to the polls. It's given them, a lot more opportunity to bring people out who may not, vote in the past or may worry about the election day experience. They don't know where to go. They can't take work off. I mean, you're able to vote on the weekend now.
Yeah.
So I think that helps kind of lean a little, credence to the idea that, we're still going to see a fair number of people come out to the polls on Tuesday. The clerk estimated we could see around 150,000 in-person votes.
Wow.
Which we've had. I think the number I plugged into my spreadsheet today was like around 133,000 early votes between absentee ballots and people in person. So she expects, turnout to range between 51 and 54%, which if it's on the high end of that, I mean, that would be the highest turnout going back to 2008 in terms of the percentage number. But in terms of like the actual number of voters, if we see around 290,000, that would be the most going back to 2012. And I think that's really significant because Detroit has lost population in that time. So when we're making these comparisons, it's like, it's hard to kind of rely on some of those Obama era numbers because there were just more registered voters in the city. But people have been kind of wondering, like, is the energy that we're seeing, is this closer to like Obama versus, Biden's first race? It's hard to say, but I think at the end of the day, like turnout is going to end up being higher than I think a lot of us kind of expected at the beginning of this year when there was, some kind of concerns on the Democratic side about enthusiasm for their candidate.
Yeah, that's the same thing I've been wondering. That's why I'm talking to you right now, Malachi, because like I said, I've seen the pictures and I've been following your coverage and just following your tweets about early voting, especially in the city of Detroit, and how it feels so much more, there's more excitement out there on the ground right now. And we were just talking with Imani Harris of 482Forward about what they're doing to engage with their voters with text messages and different events and campaigns they were running. So you talked a little bit about that as well. Do you think that some of this extra work that we're seeing from the community groups and organizations for outreach and voter engagement, do you see it working?
Yeah, I mean, I think we won't know that 100% until everything's counted, Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning. But I think the signs are there. I mean, you can just see it as you're moving in the city. I mean, between the billboards and the, incessant stream of text messages you're getting, and the kind of ads you're getting on your social media, to actually people like out and about. I mean, just anecdotally in my own neighborhood, on the east side last week, I was walking to the bus and I saw a guy who pulled up with a truck full of Harris campaign signs and was like putting them out. And he asked me, if I was going to vote, my plan and everything. And then the next day, or actually it was yesterday on Sunday, a Harris campaign staffer came to my door and knocked on it and made sure that I knew that, early voting was coming to an end on Sunday and I would have to go in person. And at least for that interaction, I have to imagine it's because they know that, I typically vote in elections and have used absentee ballots in the two previous elections, but I haven't this time. I'm going to go vote in person on Tuesday. And so this is another component of it. With early voting, the campaigns have access to that information of when you have requested an absentee ballot, if it showed up at your house yet, and if you turned it back in, what you've done in previous elections. And so they can use all that information to really target the people that still haven't cast a ballot yet. They don't need to waste resources on people who have already voted. Maybe they can ask those people to reach out to their friends, like 482Forward's trying to get, everybody contact 10 people in your circle, and then they contact 10 people. The campaign itself can really just focus on the people that haven't voted yet. And so I think that will have an impact. And we have yet to see really what it will be. But, I think all these signs are kind of pointing toward higher turnout.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be that way as well. Malachi Barrett is a reporter with Bridge Detroit following along with the election on the ground. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro to discuss voter participation in Detroit. And I will be following you on Twitter, so just don't stop.
I'll never stop tweeting. I'll be there. Take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye. Coming up, there's been a big focus on early voting, as evidenced in the discussions we've been having. But as it gets easier to vote, the partisan divide about confidence in election security has grown.
We'll dig deeper into the dynamics of early voting and the misinformation that surrounds it. Stay right there.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. There's a widening partisan divide about confidence in election accuracy. Republicans are becoming less confident in election results, and Democrats are getting more confident.
We know that former President Trump's false claims of a stolen election in 2020 sparked a lot of distrust in U.S. elections.
Yet, access to voting is increasing with things like mail-in voting, early in-person voting, and same-day registration.
That's right. In Michigan, voters have all three of those options for the first time in a presidential election.
In 2022, Michigan voters passed a ballot measure that requires at least 9 days of early in-person voting ahead of state and federal elections.
So early voting started last Saturday, October 26, and it just ended yesterday.
With over 3 million voters casting ballots ahead of Election Day.
Last week on WDET's Created Equal, Stephen Henderson spoke with two experts on Democratic participation to find out how early voting will impact this election.
David Becker is the director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and Dale Thompson is a professor of political science at the University of Michigan Dearborn.
Becker began by discussing how widespread early voting is in the United States this year.
Overall, across the United States, 55 million people have already returned their ballots as we sit here today talking. I don't know if this increases turnout, but it doesn't hurt. It's a good option. Voters like it. But I think there's another really important point about early voting and mail voting, and that is it improves the security and integrity of the election. And this is often just passed over by a lot of people when they're discussing it. When you compress all of the voting in your entire state into a single 12 or 14-hour period on a single Tuesday in November, you're just incredibly vulnerable to all kinds of things that could happen. It could be some kind of intentional act. It could be a ransomware attack. It could be weather. It could be traffic. It could be you were going to vote, but then you had to go pick your kid up at school, or your kid got sick. And there's all kinds of things that when you have only this brief window in which to vote, you're somewhat vulnerable as a voter, and the system is somewhat vulnerable. We've seen this before when bad weather has hit places or when there was some kind of technical difficulty. When you spread voting out over a series of days or weeks and let voters choose how and when they want to vote, you've just created a much greater system by which you can mitigate any potential problems. If you show up at a polling place and the line is too long, you can come back tomorrow. If the weather is really bad or traffic is bad, you can come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
And this also inoculates you against the wave of disinformation that we're seeing and that we expect to ramp up over the course of the next week through Election Day. We're going to see disinformation coming from overseas, from places like Russia and Iran and China. And we're going to see disinformation coming from domestic actors. And that disinformation is going to be designed to confuse voters and to maybe get them to self-suppress, maybe get them to lack understanding about the process and for some reason lose their opportunity to vote. Once you vote and bank your ballot, get it cast early, you've inoculated yourself against all of that
from all the potential shenanigans or all the misinformation about it, right?
Right.
Dale, I want to bring you into the conversation here and have you talk more specifically about what's going on here in Michigan. 240,000 people have showed up to vote early in person already, and as David said, we already have 2 million votes cast in the state of Michigan. What does that early voting mean for the process? What does it mean for the people who are voting in terms of the security of their votes? And does this change the way even that elections have to be administered, right? With clerks and local election staff working more, I guess, than they would have had to in previous years.
One, it certainly affects the way campaigns are run. We have records now that are available to campaigns where they can actually reach out to voters who maybe requested absentee ballots and haven't turned them in yet to encourage them to vote. Or one of the great features is if you've spoiled your ballot, you get notified and you can actually correct that.
You could go back and fix it.
Right, which is something that wouldn't be available if you did something wrong on Election Day, right? So that's a great feature as well. It certainly changes what we do and how we plan out our voting activities. We have the ability to sort of make a plan in a way that we didn't before. We can plan for doing it at a more convenient time, for sure. As far as security goes, I think there are many, as you expand access, as you expand the way that people can get involved, it does raise questions of uncertainty. This isn't the way we've done it in the past. I'm used to going and putting my mark on the ballot submitting it to the machine at the polling station. And if all these people can mail in ballots and, come in on the day and register on the day, it just raises questions and uncertainty. And that's when we have campaigns fostering it with misinformation, that gets worse. But there are lots of measures in place to ensure that these processes are secure, which is part of what entails a lot of the work that you talk about at the local clerk's level. And certainly that work has expanded in terms of ballot boxes being available, monitoring ballot boxes, ensuring a chain of custody of ballots from those boxes, verifying signatures on absentee ballot applications and actual votes. So there is indeed a lot of work and a lot of expenses, and undertaken by workers who are under threat, frankly, of a physical threat, and certainly under a lot of stress in taking care of this. So we're very fortunate to have people who are willing to perform those duties.
Yeah. So in Michigan, early voting is part of, I guess, a suite of changes that we have made to voter participation and registration and a lot of different things about the democratic process. We started in 2018 at the polls, changing things, and did it again in 2022. What do we know about the effect that those overall changes have had on voting? I think I've seen stats that suggest more people are participating in the democratic process here in Michigan as a result of these things. But how much do we know about what's changing?
Well, I would say, unfortunately, we don't know a whole lot.
It's too early.
Unfortunately. But I think we will continue to know more as the data become available, for sure. I've seen similar evidence that we do see some increases in voting. Till you tease out, those are the effects of the actual changes that we've put in place. That's certainly a good question. We certainly see, in some cases, some new, even in sort of the early voting that's happened, at least nationwide, we see some folks who may not have voted in the prior election, but we see a lot of we see some shifting. So people who would have voted on election day are now voting earlier, and we actually see some of that, particularly in the Republican side. So Democrats are sort of voting a little bit slower than they did in 2020, which may be due to all of the uncertainty about the postal system back in 2020. People were being very much encouraged to send their votes in early so that they get there on time. We don't have that threat as much now, so people may be a little bit more comfortable with waiting to submit their votes. Or since they can vote in person early rather than absentee, we may be having some who are shifting to that as well.
That was WDET's Stephen Henderson speaking with David Becker from the Center for Election Innovation and Research and Dale Thompson from the University of Michigan Dearborn.
If you have a mail-in ballot but haven't returned it, it's too late to send it in the mail, but you can drop it off at an official ballot drop box or at your clerk's office.
Early in-person voting is over, but there's always tomorrow, Election Day.
That's right. The polls are open tomorrow from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you're not registered yet, don't worry. You can register the same day at your clerk's office.
Make your voting plan by going to WDET.org for more registration information, sample ballots, polling locations, questions and answers with candidates, and so much more. And we will get more into that later in the show.
Coming up, we'll learn how one organization is melding civic engagement with one of our favorite things to do here on the Metro when we're not on the air, that is getting sweaty on the dance floor.
Popping and locking. That's coming up next on the Metro.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, broadcasting from the Cass Corridor. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham, and we're getting groovy in here. Because it's that time of year for elections. And I often think to myself, with anyone, in what ways do you decompress after an election cycle? Do you bake? Or maybe you follow along minute by minute with all of the newscasts? One group thinks the answer is dance. Dance for Democracy, which considers itself the longest-running election and dance party, aims to empower dancers nationwide to vote. The nonpartisan group believes it's a way to get young voters involved while helping them find a new community. Stacey Hot Wax Hale, Hot to Death, and Who Dat are just a few names performing on election night alongside guest speakers. To chat more about Dance for Democracy, we have Ellen Vial here. Ellen is the co-director for Dance for Democracy. Welcome to the Metro, Ellen.
Good morning, Tia. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And why an election-themed dance party?
So we started doing this in 2016 during the primary election. And our motivation was we were really involved in the local electronic music scene, and we felt like our friends and peers didn't necessarily show up for elections. They weren't super excited about civic participation. And so the original modus operandi was really to just sort of like use dancing and using like this like DJ platform as a way to get people excited about voting. And really sort of like creating a community ritual around voting. So like you vote, you get your I voted sticker, and you show up to the party and get in for free and then watch the election results and dance together.
I mean, shuffling and watching results. You know what I mean? Like, that just sounds like my type of day. So I'm just thinking like, man, this is right up our alley at WDET. So you all consider yourself the longest running election watch and dance party. And you talked about you've been going on since the primary election of 2016. What was 2020 like during the pandemic when you all could not be together?
Oh, that's a good question. So we did have a party on the primary for the primary election in 2020, and it was a very tense time. It was like days before the state of Michigan shut down for COVID, and so our party was sort of like the last big event that I attended, and I think a lot of people that around me attended before we couldn't see each other in person for a really long time. So obviously we didn't have a party for the general election in 2020. So I think the first time we were back was for the 2022 midterms.
Yeah. Which, once again, was hard for all of us to go through the pandemic, especially during the election cycle. So you're a nonpartisan group as well. Why is it important to connect with all voters using dance, not just from one side or this side, but just everyone?
I think the original, like, I don't know, we just wanted to focus on voting. Like, that was it. And we're not like incorporated one way or the other. We're not like a C3 or a C4. So like technically I think we could say whatever we wanted. But the motive was really just about kind of creating ritual and like strong feeling of community about this like baseline civic participation. Because I think since the event has grown, we've gotten involved with more community organizations like Michigan Liberation and Detroit Action, who hire like all kinds of like canvassers in the election season, and so our parties become sort of like their like election watch party, which has been really amazing. And so like we've like been able to just sort of like build on this idea of civic participation, but we really just wanted to sort of like start with this, I don't know, sort of like baseline, like this is like the one thing that you can do, right? And then let's grow on that, and let's figure out the next day after the election, like how like we continue organizing from there.
I love it. This is the Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent, and we're chatting with Ellen Vial. Ellen is the co-director of Dance for Democracy, and they're holding an event at Spot Lite Election Night. It begins at 8 p.m. We love Spot Lite here at WDET as well. Shout out to Rula David. But there are so many different things that we could talk about in terms of art and activism and art and democracy or what have you. In what ways did this particular DJ dance community in the city of Detroit make you think that these people actually can do this? They can get out and they can vote if we give them a little bit of a nudge. What was your end there when you were trying to get more people involved with participating with voting? Because I know it's probably hard to reach some of the creatives on a certain level wherever they may be at that given moment.
Well, I know for us, in like the first year that we did this, it was just I was probably like 21 or 22. And was just really steeped in the scene of like, we were like throwing parties, we were booking DJs, we were like at all the different venues around town. And I saw like the way that people would show up just because there was something going on and like a DJ that they liked. Yeah. Or a bunch of DJs that they liked, right? Even better. And so I was like, let's put this to the test. Like, let's see if we can use this as a draw to get this community that otherwise, like from my vantage point at the time, wasn't necessarily super politically active. Yeah. And see if we can get everybody to start voting and associating voting with this cool, hopefully happy for them event. It seemed to work, which was really cool. I think it's become sort of a tradition for a lot of people now.
Which I love to hear that now there are folks who are canvassing and those who are in organizations, they look to you all for their decompress their night. Once they're done with the election stuff and campaigning, 8 p.m. they know where they can go and have a nice little decompression moment there. So as we continue on chatting with you right now, Ellen, before I let you go though, I just want to ask you a little bit about the event itself. You have some really, really big name DJs. Stacey Hotwexhale, I mean, she's like the godmother of DJing here in the city of Detroit. So you have so many big names there that are listed. Just talk about some of the cool things that will be involved as well as your guest speakers.
Sure. Yeah. So we're super excited for our lineup. We've got DJ Des Andres. Yeah. And massive shout out to Stacey. We had her at the last party in 2022. And we had all these young folks who had been canvassing and had like never been to sort of like this like house kind of DJ event before. And she just was like, so the way that she like worked this crowd was so cool. We thought it was like so memorable and we had to bring her back. So yeah, and then we've got Hot to Death, Terry Hudat, Scott Zacharias, others. And we will have something I'm really excited about this year is we're bringing in this giant LED TV screen to like show the election results on. So it's like 9 feet long or something like that. It's going to be, yeah. So a great way to like, you can either like look at the DJs and dance and decompress and then like turn to your left and like watch the results. So I think that's going to be really fun. And then, yeah, one of the things that we really wanted to like highlight because we've seen so much frustration in our community in this election season around just around sort of like the options that you have and the presidential slate is like what is organizing like starting November 6th look like? Like how do we as a community show up and like really like create stronger connections and like connect to organizations doing amazing on the ground work who are getting ready for like big ballot initiatives in 2026 and stuff like that. So that's the impetus for sort of our speaker lineup that tomorrow night. So we're going to have folks from Michigan Liberation there to talk about like what their next couple of years look like and what their big priorities are. And then we are going to have some speakers from the Uncommitted movement to talk about like they've created this really powerful campaign that sort of was like specifically directed at the election tomorrow, right? But they've created so many big waves and like connected with so many people that we want to give them an opportunity to share with folks what are they going to do starting Wednesday.
And how they even did it so quickly. It was, excuse me, it was so fast to see how they were able to start this movement. So really interested in hearing that as well. I want to say thank you to Ellen Vial, the co-director for Dance for Democracy. Dance for Democracy, Detroit's election watch and dance party is happening tomorrow night at Spot Lite. It is free to the public. It begins at 8 p.m. You don't want to miss it if you are looking to groove and move on Democracy Night. So thank you so much for being here, Ellen.
Thank you guys so much for having me. And I will also shout out to Happy's Pizza. We'll have pizza tomorrow for everybody.
Eat Happy's.
WDET newsroom, several transportation services are providing discounted or free rides to the polls tomorrow. Lyft is offering passengers a half-off rate. You just need to use the code VOTE24.
Coming up, WDET journalists have been working hard to give you all the info you need this election. And you can find all those resources online at WDET.org.
We'll give you a quick roadmap for that next. Stay with us.
This is what it sounded like as election workers counted ballots downtown Detroit in 2020.
The near riot made officials harden their resolve to protect poll workers, says Detroit City Clerk Janice Winfrey.
We got through 2020 when all of that happened, the threats and the hurling insults at election workers, and it wasn't expected. So now we know that that may happen, and we are ready if it should happen.
There are 47 states that now have some kind of early in-person voting.
84%. That's the number of polling locations in Metro Detroit that were inaccessible. What exactly does that mean?
We're looking to make sure that they have accessible parking, and we're looking to make sure that there is an accessible voting machine as well as a wheelchair height voting booth.
When Black folks vote at 90% for Democrats, as our community often does, it's not because of some deep partisanship or love for Democrats. It's because Black folks are making intelligent, savvy, dynamic decisions about what's best for themselves and their community.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I am Robin Vincent. We were just hearing some sounds there, some sounds that encapsulate how much we have been doing here at WDET covering recent election coverage. Our team's been working hard to keep you informed, and finally, tomorrow is the day, Election Day.
Over 3 million Michiganders have already cast their ballots with mail-in and early in-person voting. And if you're planning to vote tomorrow, you need a voting plan.
That includes being informed, knowing if you're registered, where your polling location is, and how you're going to get there.
Here to talk about all of that and more is WDET's digital manager and editor, Jenny Sherman. Jenny, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Jenny, you've led the charge putting together the WDET voter guide this year. Let's start with an overview. What's in the voter guide?
Yeah, so we wanted to accomplish two main goals with this guide. First, we wanted to create a hub for all the election coverage our news team at WDET has produced during this election, because there's been a lot of it. And two, we wanted to compile all the important information Michigan voters should know to help them make a voting plan and make informed choices about who they want to support in this election. So it has everything from important deadlines for things like voter registration and requesting an absentee ballot to links where you can look up your sample ballot or polling location or see if you're registered to vote. It also has information about election security and voter intimidation with numbers to contact if you experience anything intimidating or unusual at your polling site. And then it has summaries about some of the key races in the state going all the way down the ballot, from the presidential race to congressional and state house races to the Michigan Supreme Court and the university boards. And for many of those races, we included links to WDET's candidate questionnaire graphic, where readers can compare the candidates' answers about their backgrounds and priorities.
And Jenny, I have had the, I guess you can say, pleasure of working on WDET's candidate guide back in like 2016, intern Tia, and it is no joke. It is a lot of work. You have to pay close attention to details, make sure the numbers are all right, and there's so many numbers scattered across every place, and it's such a heavy lift. So how are you all coming up with some of the processes and the questions, especially the questions for the candidates? How are you guys just working through that?
Yes, it is definitely an undertaking, one we needed to recruit several interns to help us with. But we started reaching out to candidates over the summer ahead of the August primary to get a better sense of who these candidates are, what their priorities would be if they were elected. And we reached out to all the candidates on the ballot, not just Democrats and Republicans. But yeah, that was a pretty tedious process. We had to gather all the contact information. And then we asked them to provide just some basic information about themselves, like their age, occupation, level of education, a short bio, and then asked them to answer a few questions about issues that have come up a lot in this election cycle. And that is really like the guide we used for what type of questions we wanted to ask them. So some of those were things like abortion access and women's reproductive rights, gun control, and then also the economy and inflation, which has been a top issue for many Michigan voters in this election.
You're listening to The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent with Tia Graham. We've got WDET's digital manager and editor, Jenny Sherman, with us. She spearheaded our voter guide, and it is so easy to use and so incredibly helpful. I'm biased, of course, but
Same.
I think we can all agree on this. Jenny, the voter guide is a hub for WDET news reporting on the election. And that means there are a lot of stories that contain nuance that is missing right now from the conversation. What kind of stories can people find within the voter guide?
Yeah, so our reporters have been working super hard this election season, speaking to candidates, talking to voters about the issues that might be swaying their vote. And many of the stories can be found on our website and in our voter guide. For example, we had Quinn Kleinfelter and Russ McNamara from WDET both attend the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee and the DNC in Chicago, where they spoke with delegates and candidates like Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers, who are both running for U.S. Senate in Michigan. We had stories about the U.S. Senate debates. We had interviews with U.S. House candidates in key races, like Quinn's story on the 10th Congressional District rematch between John James and his challenger Carl Marlinga, which, according to his reporting, was among one of the closest races during the 2022 midterms. And we also have stories on some local races and ballot proposals. Like, Robin, you had a great story last week about Proposal S,
Thanks,
the Detroit
Jenny.
Public Schools millage, which will be on the ballot for Detroit voters. So really just a range of things, and you can find all of this in the voter guide.
Awesome. And our last question, we talk a little bit about the information that will help voters on Election Day, make it easier for them. For example, my question to you, Jenny, would have been, have you voted? We talked a little bit about it. You have not voted. So you've been working on this guide. What are some of the things that you know will be helpful for voters, especially using WDET's voter guide?
Yeah, so with early voting this year, I know a lot of people have cast their ballots already. Some people like to vote on Election Day. I'm one of them. I just like the energy of going in on Election Day.
Yeah.
But, there are certain deadlines that you want to know when you're this close to Election Day and you haven't cast a ballot. Same-day registration. If you haven't registered to vote at this point, you would need to do that at your local clerk's office. If you're not sure what's on the ballot, that's in the voter guide. You can take a look at your sample ballot. If you got an absentee ballot and you haven't mailed that back yet, then that's something you would also want to take to your clerk's office or in a ballot drop box at this point. And just making sure you have a plan for where you're going to vote and what time the polls open and close and things like that. And it's all in the voter guide, wdet.org/voter guide.
Thank you so much to the person who's been on the back end of this voter guide all election season. Jenny Sherman is WDET's digital manager and editor. Make your plan to vote, and thank you so much, Jenny, for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
Live special coverage of the 2024 election from WDET and NPR starts tomorrow night at 8 p.m. You can also follow WDET on social media. And of course, come back to WDET.org for the results.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you tomorrow.